Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed, part 2 of the September Q&A. Tim hasn't gone on holidays again, so I still have him here with me. He's ready to work.
I think I'll have to plan a few more holidays based on this.
He's never going to live down that one holiday he took this year. So anyway, let's get into it. Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the new Duranaut High Performance Thermal Paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description.
Do we anticipate mid-tier B650 boards to be able to support higher-end Zen 7 products?
Well, I didn't anticipate Zen 7 even being on AM5, so I guess full disclaimer, we have no confirmation, even for Zen 6, but certainly not Zen 7, as to what platform that is on and chipset support and all that. So that's years away at this point in time. So AMD has not confirmed or denied any of that. So I have really no information to give you. This comes from a Moore's Law is dead rumor from Tom, who's very confident that Zen 7 will end up on AM5. So hopefully he's right, because that would be amazing news for anyone who is jumping on AM5 or has jumped on AM5, considering it, all that sort of stuff. So just have to make that clear. We are not confirming Zen 7 on AM5. Now, if Zen 7 does end up on AM5, there should be no technical reason for why a B650 motherboard cannot support those CPUs, because if they did some sort of there's no backwards compatibility, but it's still the same socket type deal, which is what they tried to pull on AM4, and there were technical reasons for why they, it couldn't happen and blah, blah, blah. And
those mythical technical reasons.
Yeah, and we were having none of that, so we just put out a video ripping AMD a new one, said they can't do this, it's BS, blah, blah, blah. And then I think it was 2 days they walked it back. So that was good. So
they very quickly solved those technical issues.
It was one of those situations where we in the community saved AMD from AMDing themselves and wrecking what has to date been their best platform ever. And had they segmented it in that way, it would not have been their best platform ever. And it would have just been another okay platform. And it would have really hurt a lot of the brand image and mind share and all of that. So anyway, thankfully AMD didn't AMD it, and hopefully they can make AM5 even better by releasing Zen 6 and Zen 7 on it. So we'll see.
In some titles, even though the metrics show 100% GPU utilization, power consumption is noticeably lower than normal. From this, I deduce that even if just one GPU component, VRAM, bus, etc., is acting as a bottleneck, the GPU utilization will still be 100%, even if its cores could actually push harder. So is there a way to figure out exactly which GPU component is holding back performance? If it's VRAM, it's easy to figure out, but what about the rest? Issue with CPU utilization as well, because there's different parts of the CPU that can be utilized, and parts can be underutilized even though it's reporting 100%.
Well, it can even be the other way around. It can be 100% the bottleneck, but only being reported to be 60% utilized as
That's
well.
Right,
so that can also happen. So utilization, particularly for CPU, is notoriously sketchy. It's kind of I don't want to say ballpark, because sometimes it's not even that.
It's a gross oversimplification of the product, isn't
Yes.
it? They're trying to say, here's all the components that go into the GPU, and we're going to try boil that down to one utilization number, even though there's many different things that can be utilized. So it's quite difficult.
Yeah, that's right. With the GPU, for example, I did some laptop, desktop comparison testing with VRAM with Jared from Jared's Tech. There's a video on his channel about that, so we collaborated on that. We found some interesting things where the GPU usage was the same for the 8 and 16 gigabyte, but the 8 gigabyte was much slower and therefore was using less power, because although all the cores were being utilized, they're having to wait around till the VRAM was available or whatever was happening there. So that was causing a hold up for the GPU. So although it was reported to be as used as heavily as the 16 gigabyte model, you're getting very different performance results and then very different power usage. So that's one thing. I guess memory bandwidth can be another thing, though we don't see that as often. And a way to find out if your GPU is memory bandwidth limited is just to overclock the VRAM and see if that boosts performance. And if you are memory bandwidth limited, it will. But as for other things, like generally PCI Express bus and stuff like that, you're not really going to be limited by that again, unless VRAM becomes a factor there. And then primarily you are talking about VRAM being the issue. So I would say for the most part, the GPU metric, the utilization metric is pretty accurate. Certainly much more so than what we see on the CPU side. But yeah, we have seen examples where, if you run out of VRAM, weird things can happen. So as for how to figure that out, depends on what the problem is. It's a lot of troubleshooting and working out. Sometimes, as you say, it's more obvious than others. But I can't think off the top of my head any other examples where you would see that sort of thing. But
yeah, I think it's important to remember as well that just because you're seeing low power consumption in one game compared to another game, it doesn't mean that something is bottlenecked or broken about how that game is running on the GPU. There are just some instructions that are used in games that are more power intensive than others. So, you can be flogging your GPU with path tracing, you might see quite high power consumption, but then in another game that doesn't use that rendering technology, it's still 100% utilizing your GPU in all the ways that it should be, but just those instructions are less power intensive. So the GPU itself uses less power. So yeah, there's certainly games, especially if you're using like 5090s and 4090s that are rated for 575 watts or whatever, but then in games they could be like 200 watts less than that limit. That doesn't mean it's bottlenecked or working poorly, just it's a more efficient instructions, doesn't have to use as much power.
Depends on how much of the core it's using as well and stuff like that. So anyway, there can also be driver bugs and game issues and other things that can creep into this conversation, but I think that's the bulk of it.
Yep.
All right. Sort of a crystal ball time thing here. You still haven't brought the crystal ball, have you?
No, I really should bring that though. It's just sitting on a shelf.
I'll have to try and remind you next month. Yep. Should people with $600 or a $600 budget that want an RTX GPU wait for the 5070 Super, or should they just buy a 5070 or another option? Well, I don't think there's too many other options for $600 with an RTX GPU, is there?
Yeah, so excluding AMD from this discussion, which probably makes sense anyway, considering 9070 pricing at the moment in a lot of regions. But yeah, so should you wait? Should you buy now? Should you wait? I think that the supercards are probably going to come in January of next year, CES. I know there's been some talk that potentially will be this year, but I think it's more likely next year. I don't have any concrete, like super solid info on that. So it could be one or the other. So either way, you're probably looking at like November or January, which isn't actually that different in the end.
So you got about 4 months from
4
now.
months, yeah, is probably about when how long you have to wait, which in this life cycle, the 5070 has been out for 6 months now or something like that. So yeah, it's a tough one. I think in a lot of these situations, it depends on the games that you're playing right now. Like if there's an upcoming game that you really want to play, especially if it's multiplayer, you want to play it with mates at launch, like a Battlefield 6, something like that, and your current GPU is just not up to scratch, you're desperate for an upgrade, then maybe you can't wait long enough and you really want to play that game, maybe you'd upgrade now, especially because the 5070 is generally well priced. It's not above MSRP. In a lot of regions, it's actually below the MSRP, which makes it a reasonable-ish deal. But I think outside of that, like if I was just generally wanting a new GPU, I was sort of maybe playing single-player titles, I'm like, yeah, my GPU's getting a little old, I could do with an upgrade. Then at this point, I probably would be waiting. I think the 12 gigabyte VRAM, as you've sort of mentioned many times, is going to become an issue at some point. There are titles where, depending on the resolution you're playing, it is borderline within the limits, and it certainly is possible with current games to exceed 12 gigabytes if you use certain resolutions and setting combinations, which won't be as much of an issue with the 18 gigabyte, or at least rumored 18 gigabyte 5070 Super. And I would expect the pricing will be pretty similar to the 5070. It might be $600, but I wouldn't expect it to be, like a $700 Super model or something like that. So for most people, if I wasn't desperate, yeah, I'd probably wait. But if I had that, as I said, the situation where there's a multiplayer game or something I wanted to play with mates coming up right away and I couldn't play that on my current card, the 5070 is a reasonable deal.
Yeah, so it's being announced in January and available shortly after CES, a couple of weeks, let's say, so mid-January, mid to late
Yeah.
January. Let's just say, I mean, it could be the last GPU release, so it could be 2 months after
Yeah, it
that
could be
period.
March. Yeah.
But let's say, even at the earliest, if it's announced at CES, availability shortly after, that's about a 4-month period. It could be an additional, say, 2 months beyond that point where pricing does settle down. It becomes available at MSRP.
That's right.
So it could be, at the very earliest, a 6-month wait from this point in time. It could be 8 or 9 months. It's difficult to say. So do you want to wait that long? Basically, what we're saying is it's impossible for us to give you an accurate answer on this one because there's just so many unknown variables, like what it's going to cost, when it's going to be available.
When it's available for the price that it's advertised at.
Yeah, the 5070 pricing could drop down. Black Friday's coming up. That could be a time to buy one.
That's right. Especially if they're anticipating the supercards coming out in January, they probably will want to adjust the price of the current models, especially the models like last time we saw the Super Series. The 4070 and 4070 Super coexisted in the market, but they lowered the price of the 4070 when they announced the Super model. But then the higher tier cards were just a straight replacement. So the 4070 Ti was discontinued and the 4070 Ti Super took over that price point. But then if you did get in, you could get some reasonable deals on the older models and the sort of Black Friday time. I think with like the 4080 was coming down to like almost $1,000, which was the eventual price of the 4080 Super. Can't quite remember on that one. And then it was replaced. So those are all things to sort of take into account. With the 5070, I think it benefited. You could actually buy it at the MSRP pretty close after it launched. It wasn't wildly out of whack like you saw with 5080s. So potentially there'll be good supply of the next gen model. But then if the Super model is much more attractive because it actually has enough VRAM for once, then maybe it sells out and isn't available for a while at its MSRP. We just don't know. But then another factor to consider that's just come to me now is that generally the supercards are less popular overall. Most people upgrade, if they're upgrading to a 50 series model, will do so prior to the Super Series, which makes we don't often see as much of that sort of price inflation at the launch of supercards. They launch into a more settled market and things like that. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say.
I mean, at the very least, I think the advice I'd be giving is, when is Black Friday? What date is it?
It's like November, November, isn't it? 26 or something?
Okay, so it's like maybe 8 weeks away, something like that.
Yeah.
So I would wait at this point in time, see what Black Friday brings. I have no idea what bargains or deals there will be to had at that point in time, but I'd wait till then, and depending on what pops up, that may help make your decision.
And at least be aware of it as well. Like, at least you know that there's this rumored Super Series card, so hopefully you won't be shocked, for example, if you bought a 5070 at Black Friday and then 2 months later they announce a super card. You'll be buying that with pretty much with the knowledge that a superior product is going to be launching soon, which will help you out and not get that sort of instant buyer's regret sort of thing. With AMD discontinuing B650 last month, is it better to buy the B850 for support and longevity? I'm planning to build a PC, but in my region, B650 can be had for 20 to 30% cheaper.
It comes down to features and stuff like that, but if we're just comparing similar spec, B650 to B850 board, but the B650 is like 20 to 30% cheaper, then I'd recommend getting that because you're essentially buying the exact same chipset. So B850 was just a rebadged, refreshed B650. There's nothing special about B850. To make it seem a bit different, AMD messed around with what's mandated. So I think it's the primary PCIe x16 slot is now mandated to be 5.0 spec, whereas it could be 4.0 or 5.0 with B650. But I think the M.2 was mandated to be PCIe 5.0 on B650, whereas now it can be 4.0 or 5.0 on B850. A little bit confusing there.
We have a whole video on the channel that goes through all those differences, so you can check that out.
Yeah.
I'll explain everything for you.
Essentially, it's the same silicon, it's the same product, so support is exactly. There's no technical reason for B850 supporting something that B650 can't, really.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking about like PCI Express spec stuff, as I just noted. But even then, there'll be plenty of B650 boards that have the same PCIe spec as B850, so even there. But when it comes to CPU support, there is absolutely no technical reason And the same thing with GPU support. So graphics cards, CPUs, you should be able to slot the same thing on either board and get pretty much the same results.
And discontinuing the boards doesn't mean discontinuing the BIOS support, so B650 will still be supported.
I mean, there's B350 boards that still get support and BIOS updates and stuff like that. So I would expect certainly, ASRock, Asus, MSI, Gigabyte to roll out BIOS updates for B650 boards for the life of AM5. Now, look, there was a few situations with AM4 where the newer like B550 got BIOS updates before B450, but in most instances it was like you had to wait 1 to 4 weeks, and then the older boards ended up seeing the same AGESA code rolled out to those boards. So yeah, I would say of the 20 to 30%, if there's features that you don't need or features that you're not missing out on, basically.
Yep.
All right, an interesting one here, Tim. I'm keen to get your thoughts on this. What do you both think about Corsair settling a class action lawsuit where they were sued due to advertised RAM speeds not reaching the speed by default without activating XMP? Aren't practically all RAM companies guilty of this? Guilty in quotation marks. So I heard about this, didn't really know too much about it. I think it was posted in the news section on our Discord server. I briefly looked at it and thought, there's more to this story. Like, this doesn't make sense. But I didn't at the time really dig into it because I was busy doing something. So I've got a few notes here for you just to get you up to speed, because I don't think you're too around this, are you?
Vaguely understand what's going on, but yeah.
So basically, the settlement that they reached, so it means Corsair has agreed to pay $5.5 million to settle a lawsuit. Those that are eligible get a pro rate share of the fund, depending on the number of valid claims and the number of qualifying products claimed, blah, blah, blah. There's a bit more to that. But then the changes that Corsair must make. So Corsair must update its packaging, its website listings, and reseller product specs to make clear that the high speeds advertised, so what the memory is validated for, are up to speeds, not default speeds.
Okay.
The labels product pages must include disclaimers that the maximum speed may require overclocking or BIOS adjustments, and that the actual performance depends on the system components and the motherboard and the CPU. So I think you guys get the gist. They were sued because people were upset, evidently, that when you buy DDR5 6000 memory, say on an AM5 system, you put that in, it defaults to the Gen X spec or whatever the qualifying spec is of the CPU. So depending on how many sticks you put in, it could be DDR5 4800 or DDR5 5200 or 5600. It depends.
Right. So was the XMP speed like covered under warranty? Because I sort of heard some conflicting information that there was like Corsair wasn't like the speed was advertised DDR5 6000, but if you actually use that, they might not have like given you warranty support at that spec.
I didn't hear that part of it.
Okay, so that might have just been speculation.
In the research I did, that wasn't discussed or came up. The main thing was if you buy DDR5 8000 is probably a better example, right? And you pair that with your Intel CPU. Well, it didn't even matter what CPU it was or whatever. It was more just if you buy DDR5 whatever 8000, you stick it on the motherboard, you install the CPU, you connect all the other necessary stuff, and you hit the power button. When the computer turns on and boots into Windows, it'll be at like DDR5 4800 and not DDR5 8000.
Right.
Which is the dumbest thing in the... It's like saying I bought a 500 hertz monitor, installed my GPU, installed the relevant drivers, booted into Windows, and it was at 60 hertz. So it needs to be now advertised as up to 500 hertz because it didn't default to... I know some GPU display adapters will default it to 500 hertz or whatever, but that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I can sort of understand the point of it being an up to speed, because if you buy a CPU, for example, and it's advertised at 5.3 gigahertz, whatever, it will just do that by default. So you don't necessarily need to say that's up to that spec because it'll just do it. But then I can also understand the other point that surely people understood what it actually means. It's not like the product may not hit DDR5 6000 speed, because sometimes with like an up to, it means that
It might work.
it
up to
might
this.
give you that speed, but it might not.
Whereas these have been validated.
Yeah,
to that
those
speed.
it's saying it will do DDR5 6000 if you set it to DDR5 6000.
And have a CPU with an IMC that supports that, and a motherboard that has a
Sure, but that's like you buy a 500 hertz monitor and you don't have a fast enough HDMI connector, so it runs at 144 hertz. Now, does that mean it was false advertising to say it was a 500 hertz monitor? I'd say no. It is a 500 hertz monitor and was advertised correctly. So, I guess with the monitor example, there's also within Windows, you don't have to go into the BIOS and change settings to enable the 500 hertz mode. It is available to you easily in that sense, whereas the BIOS, it's different to like the Windows operating system. Like, would they have gotten away with this lawsuit, for example, if in Windows there was a toggle for DDR5 6000 if it defaulted to DDR5 4800?
I mean, you're splitting hairs of what a BIOS is and what an operating system is. They're both pieces of software that are easily accessible on the computer. And also, if really the Windows thing is more of a grey area, because if you get the memory and stick it on the motherboard, the thing to enable it is there without an additional purchase.
Yeah, I guess as well, though, is it like with the monitor, is it the fault of the monitor that it's not running at 500 hertz by default? I would say that's entirely the GPU/Windows configuration's fault.
Well, you could say it's the CPU's fault as well to a degree, but
then again, like the CPU is only spec'd for that, for JEDEC, right? And it is technically overclock, whereas it's not overclocking a 500 hertz monitor to run it at 500 hertz.
I think this is so dumb that everyone could be sued, because they could sue AMD because AMD, they've advertised every single AM5 processor with reviewers with DDR5 6000 memory, even though it doesn't officially support that. And they fall back on that BS and be like, well,
with his performance claims.
And then they released when they had to sell 800 series boards, which we've talked about in this Q&A series, just being merely refreshed 600 series chipsets boards. They said, now supports DDR5 8000. And they said that's new, like...
And it wasn't.
Well, not all of them did. They sort of do now. The CPUs seem to, for the most part. I don't think I found a CPU that doesn't. I certainly found motherboard BIOSes that didn't support certain modules.
And it wasn't a unique B850 thing, though.
No, it wasn't.
It was just like, now some boards will be better and it will run at that speed potentially.
Yeah, and a lot of people ran with that. We saw it in the comments, people saying, no, the whole point of the 800 series boards is they now support DDR5 8000. You can do that. I think it's just all a bit silly. Like, really, again, Corsair and all the other... There's so much more to unpack here, by the way. Corsair, they advertise it as... 6,000 XMP or 6,000 Expo. So it's not, that means something. Those letters mean something. So if you don't know what they mean, then you need to go find out.
Yeah, my initial thoughts on it is that this lawsuit is BS, right? I guess when you're talking about like the nuances of it, it's like, how BS is it compared to other things? Like, do they actually need to put an up to on the box? I feel like for people actually buying the product, so non-idiot people, because it's a DIY product, you have to know how to build a PC to use it, that 99.99% of people know what that labeling means, like when you're buying it. And if you don't know what it means, you should probably do more research into what products you're buying. Like, why are you buying a DDR5 6000 product if you don't know what that spec means? Like, because you see the listings, right? You search DDR5, I want a 32 gig kit, blah, blah, blah. Whole listing of speeds. Now, why are you buying the speed, paying more money potentially if you don't know what it means?
And if you're doing it properly, you don't just willy-nilly buy the memory anyway. You work out what motherboard you have, and then you consult the QVL, and then work out what memory's on there that you think is suitable within your price range, and then you purchase that memory. And at least that memory is validated to work with that CPU and motherboard combo, and it should, when you load the settings, just work.
Yeah, and what happens with, like, you're talking about like JEDEC speeds, right? There's different levels of JEDEC speeds depending on how many like DIMMs you populate in the board. So even if AMD says our CPU supports officially DDR5, let's say 5200.
Yeah, so the lawsuit doesn't even cover that.
I know it doesn't even cover that, but could they get sued for saying we support DDR5 5200, but then not specifying that that's the 2 DIMM configuration?
Well, they do specify.
They do, but maybe not in the product page.
Yeah.
Because obviously...
So
right,
everything just has to be up to now, which is the worst thing for the consumer because that just becomes abusive marketing speak. Everything's up to now. Like, and you see it whenever they advertise a new product, like IPC improvements up to
5060 Ti up to 16 gig, 9060 XT up to 16 gig when they sell an 8 gig model.
Yeah, it's anti-consumer. So winning the lawsuits actually made this stuff worse because now they can loosen their validation on this memory. They can be like, up to 6,000, which means that, most of them do 6,000, but we haven't we validate 50% of them.
Or it could mean, let's say you're buying DDR5 6000 CL30 and it's up to CL30 and up to DDR5 6000, right? Well, maybe they mean we hit 6,000 speeds at CL40 speeds.
Yeah.
Which could be allowed then because you've got both of those up tos there. It's no longer clear what it means.
Yep.
So, yeah, from that sense, that's poor. I think the only way that this lawsuit, and why I brought up the warranty thing earlier, the only way this lawsuit would make sense is if Corsair was not covering the warranty of using the memory at DDR5 6000 speeds. Because if they're selling you the DDR5 6000 memory and then something goes wrong, the memory dies at that speed, they definitely should be covering the warranty on that. So then the lawsuit would make some sense because they weren't honoring it, or maybe then an up to makes sense. Like it's up to 6,000, but we only will warranty you up to 4,800 or whatever.
And that's still really anti-consumer.
It is, but that would make the lawsuit make sense.
I don't think that's the case. We can add some text or whatever on screen if that happens to be the case. But through the research I didn't come across that at all. And then the other part of the question was like ramifications does this have for the rest of the memory makers?
We've sort of been talking about it, haven't it? They can now use up to language, which is wishy-washy, to get away with qualifying
but
products.
Are they going to get
loosely
sued for not doing that up until this time? Because they could change that, like presumably G-Skill and everyone else has looked at this and go, well, we have to change our language as well because we don't want to be sued and have to settle for $5.5 million or whatever.
Well, I guess as well, like they settled, right? So they never actually took it to trial to get a verdict and potential, what is it called?
Essentially
precedent.
Yeah.
There's no precedent that's been set. Corsair has just settled the lawsuit. So I guess the other manufacturers would be worried for potentially getting sued, but they wouldn't have to worry about precedent. So there's potentially they don't have to, but they probably would because of the settlement thing. And maybe Corsair, if they took it to trial, would have actually won the lawsuit. We just don't know because they ended up settling it. So
yeah,
obviously they felt there was a risk there, and they decided that the $5.5 million payout was cheaper than the trial.
Yeah, I don't really know how you have a leg to stand on that, but clearly Corsair thought they must have because, like you say, they ended up settling.
There's a lot of other things. Like if I was suing PC hardware manufacturers, this is probably one of the last things that I would think of suing them for. There are so many other dodgy anti-consumer things that having the RAM labeled 6,000 speeds, but that means it's not the default, would be like low, way low down the list.
Yeah, it's absurd. So I'm surprised it's the thing. I'm surprised they settled, but yeah, like I said, they probably just hedged their bets and it was going to cost them less to just deal with that one and move on. But anyway, pretty dumb. All right, is there a particular reason why GPU manufacturers stop selling the last generation cards when the current generation gets released, when that isn't the case with CPUs? We're still seeing Ryzen 5000 chips getting manufactured when we're on the 9000 series now. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But we don't see that with AMD or NVIDIA GPUs.
We have in the past.
Yeah. And
they've been rebranded or renamed, which has happened. I think that is probably part of it. CPUs, they did used to, and Intel to some degree still does, rename the old product into a newer product. So it was a 3000 series chip or whatever, and it gets rebranded as a 5000 series chip, but it's a lower end part or whatever. That has happened before. So I think largely what you see on the CPU side is the manufacturer, AMD in particular, they want a large lineup of products, and their current flagship 9000 latest chips don't go down far enough in terms of the product stack to warrant making like $100 or $50 CPUs or whatever low-end part. And so instead, they continue manufacturing the older models to fill those price gaps in the market, and allows them to have more price points, more saturation. And particularly with 5000 series products, obviously different socket, they still want to support that socket. And so you would sell the newer models for people with the newer motherboards who want the highest performance. But then if you have an old model, they still want to get a sale out of you, so they continue manufacturing the old CPU. I think with GPUs, there's a lot more, I guess, manipulation in ways. Like NVIDIA doesn't necessarily want you to buy an old product. They're just much more interested in getting the margins, the sales on newer cards, because there's no reason they couldn't manufacture like an RTX 3060 and continue selling that to you right now. But they would rather sell you the newer card that is potentially in a better price to, profit ratio.
Right, with graphics cards. So you got a PCB, memory, cooler. So there's a lot more stuff that you have to include to sell the GPU, which cuts into the margins. And if the GPU is less desirable, so therefore you can't charge as much,
yeah, that's right,
then you're still paying the same amount of money for a new cooler. Realistically, the memory costs are going to be about the same, PCB costs, all that sort of stuff, the power delivery, all those things that get factored in. So it's just the GPU that's devalued. So there's really no incentive to sell an older thing. And then they have to support it for longer as well, which is annoying because there's more driver support that goes into that. Whereas on the CPU side, there's a lot less of that. And then they're just selling the CPU and the CPU package with some pins or pads, whatever it may be. So
yeah, and there's new feature support, obviously, like NVIDIA wants to advertise multi-frame generation for their whole 50 series. Now, if they released a new or just continue manufacturing the 3060, for example, then that's no longer a selling point because the 3060 doesn't support multi-frame gen. And then you have people deciding, like, do I buy the 5060, which supports multi-frame gen, or the 3060 that doesn't? And people are tossing up those value equations. NVIDIA wants to just make it simple for people. All of the new cards, all the NVIDIA GPUs currently available, all have the same feature set effectively. And so it just simplifies their lineup for people. AMD has in the past obviously done refreshes like RX 480 to RX 580.
And then sold the 580 forever.
Sold the 580 forever and has done a bit more cross-generation stuff. The RX 6600, I think, is probably reaching end of life. It was sold for quite a while. RX 7600 is still being sold. So they've done a bit more of that, keep the old models available. Sometimes it's just because they manufactured too many of the cards to begin with, and so they still have a lot of product available. Sometimes it's because of process nodes, so the newer models are made on the more expensive latest nodes, but they still want to offer a low-cost model that's more affordable to produce, so they use the older model on older nodes. But then you might not see that in a generation like this current generation because they both use the same nodes as the previous gen, so it doesn't make sense to have the inferior product manufactured on the same node. You may as well just get the newer, better product. So there's all sorts of different factors there. But I think it largely does come down to NVIDIA in particular wants the new products to be the latest, greatest things at the highest margins so they can make the most money off, incentivize you to think it's a new product and it's worth buying, as opposed to having multiple generations on the market confusing people.
Yeah, big part of it's the software component. They're not just selling the hardware. So
yeah, they don't want to have people buying a 3060 and going, oh, why can't I use that multi-frame gen thing that you advertised? Why can't I use this?
I think if people were willing to pay good money for a 3060, they'd be more than happy for that to take place. It's just that people would be aware they're not getting those features and they're getting an older, inferior products, therefore they want to pay less, which is what they do with the Ryzen CPUs. You get them for nothing now, which is, but it's still a viable product to offer. Like they're still making decent money doing it at no real...
Yeah, GPUs are larger, so margins are smaller. As you said, game developers have to support more architectures, drivers have to support more architectures. CPU doesn't have that problem. So it makes a bit more sense there. And with CPUs as well, like they just tend to make a more limited range of products in the latest series, which opens up more space for older products to occupy all that low-end stuff. NVIDIA tends to do like top to bottom stack. So they've got all products for all price points, or at least all the price points they would consider selling you a card at, they make a new product for. So there's no reason to keep the old models available.
All right. That is going to do it for part 2 of this month's Q&A series. We will have a part 3 coming up in the next few days. So make sure you subscribe for that. How do they do that?
There's a button.
Do the button thing.
Hit the button.
There's another button for that. You can do that while you're at it. Hit that. And there's also a join button, or you can click the video description and go over to Patreon and sign up there. Recommend you do that. It's pretty awesome. You get access to our exclusive Discord server. You can go to #monitors and go "Oi Tim" and ask him something about monitors, and he'll reply. And he's pretty fast. Pretty good response time there from Tim. We also do Q&A stuff, evidently, so you can put your question in there. Good chance it'll be answered. Behind the scenes content and live streams.
That's right.
Which we've got to do after this. So I don't know how I nearly forgot about that. Anyway, check that stuff out if you're interested.
Yep.
That's right.
And if you're not interested.
Yeah, if you're not interested, check it out anyway. That's sort of an order. All right. Well, thanks for watching.
Good.
I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.
See you next one.